On the night of my cousin's winter wedding in Aspen, with 180 guests already seated and the band halfway through their second set, my father lifted his glass of $300 Cabernet and said something that made the entire room turn toward me. "If it weren't for pity, nobody would have invited you." He didn't whisper it. He said it loud enough that the table beside us stopped eating. It was my aunt's wedding reception. It was the first time I had seen my family in 16 years. And the strange part was this: every person in that ballroom believed my father. They believed I was the daughter who ran away, the one who failed, the one who abandoned everything. None of them knew that the bride standing at the head table was alive because of me. And before that night ended, someone else in that room would owe their life to the same pair of hands my father had spent 16 years pretending didn't exist. But before I tell you how that happened, do me a quick favor. If stories about family betrayal, redemption, and the quiet kind of revenge resonate with you, tap like and subscribe. And tell me where you're listening from: city, state, and local time. I always read the comments. My name is Dr. Lillian Hartwell. I'm 34 years old, and I'm a trauma surgeon at Denver General Hospital. Now let me take you back to a snowy Saturday afternoon in Colorado. The day I drove 2 hours into the mountains to attend a wedding, I almost didn't survive emotionally. The invitation arrived 3 weeks earlier. Plain white envelope, no return address. Inside was a handwritten card. "Lily, please come. I can't do this without you. Emily." Emily Hartwell, my younger sister, 32 years old, the only person in my family who had ever called me after the night everything fell apart. I sat with that card for 2 days before responding. 16 years is a long silence, long enough that most people stop expecting the phone to ring. But Emily never stopped trying. She just had to do it quietly, because our father made sure I didn't exist anymore. The drive into Aspen was slow. Snow along the shoulders, pine trees dusted white. The kind of landscape that looks peaceful until you remember what it costs to live there. The venue was the Blackstone Ridge Resort, one of those places with heated stone walkways and fireplaces in every hallway. Wedding cost? At least $450,000. My father loved events like that. He measured success in square footage and guest lists. I parked in the overflow lot next to the catering trucks, 200 yards from the main entrance. I didn't come to impress anyone. I came because my sister asked. Inside the lobby stood a welcome display. Gold frame, photo collage. The Hartwell family legacy, established 1990. Every photo showed my father, his business partners, Emily, cousins, even Margaret, his second wife, but not me. The year they chose, 1990, was the year I was born, and somehow they still erased me. To understand that display, you have to go back 16 years. Westminster, Colorado. Kitchen table. I was 18. Fresh acceptance letter from Johns Hopkins Medical School early admission program. The kind of letter people frame. My father sat across from me in his $2 million house. Founder of Hartwell Financial. The man who believed money solved every problem. "You're turning it down?" he asked. His voice was calm. Too calm. I nodded. "I want to study emergency medicine, volunteer response, disaster medicine." He stared at me like I'd insulted him. "I built this company so my daughters wouldn't have to struggle, and you want to play hero in emergency rooms." I told him something I'd never said out loud before. "Mom died waiting for an ambulance. I want to make sure that doesn't happen to someone else." The silence lasted maybe 5 seconds. Then he said 3 words that changed everything. "Then leave." That afternoon, my suitcase sat on the porch, not thrown, placed, like punctuation at the end of a sentence. I left with $900 in my bank account, a backpack, and the certainty that my family believed I'd ruined my life. Emily watched from the second-floor window, 16 years old, crying so hard she couldn't speak. We didn't hug goodbye. We weren't allowed to. Back in the present, the wedding reception was already in full swing when I walked into the ballroom. Crystal chandeliers, ice sculpture bar, string quartet in the corner, women wearing gowns that cost more than my monthly mortgage, men comparing ski houses. I wore a simple dark green dress, bought online for $120. No designer label. But it fit. Heads turned. Whispers followed. Isn't that? I thought Didn't she disappear? A waiter handed me champagne. I took it. Because surgeons learned something early. When the room is hostile, calm looks like power. My place card sat at table 18, last row, near the service door. The card didn't say Lillian Hartwell. It said, guest of the bride. I smiled when I saw that. Emily always had a sense of humor. I hadn't even finished half my champagne when I heard her voice. Lily! I turned. Emily ran toward me. White silk gown, snowflake embroidery, hair pinned in a loose braid the way she used to wear it as a kid. She threw her arms around me so hard I almost dropped the glass. You came! Her voice cracked. You actually came! I hugged her back, and for a second the ballroom disappeared. All I saw was my little sister, the kid who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. Dad doesn't know I invited you, she whispered. Margaret tried to stop it. I told her I'd cancel the wedding if she interfered. I laughed softly, still dramatic. She grabbed my hands. Listen to me. Something is going to happen tonight. I need you to stay, no matter what Dad says. Promise me. I studied her face. There was something there. Not fear. Determination. Emily, what are you planning? She shook her head. Just trust me. Her fiancé appeared beside us. Daniel Carter, 32. Civil engineer. Steady handshake, kind eyes. Emily told me everything, he said. It's an honor to meet you. Everything? I asked. Emily squeezed my hand. You're the reason I'm alive today. My stomach tightened. Before I could ask what she meant, the photographer pulled her away. The band started another song. Guests returned to their tables. I sat down at table 18. 2 minutes later, my father appeared beside my chair. Richard Hartwell, 62. Perfect gray hair. Custom tuxedo. And the same expression he'd worn the night he kicked me out. I didn't realize Emily invited charity cases. He said it calmly, but loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. Hello, Dad. You have some nerve showing up here. I'm here for Emily, not you. His jaw tightened. Margaret stepped beside him. Red gown, diamond necklace, smile sharp as glass. Lillian, how unexpected. I assumed someone from the catering staff invited you by mistake. I didn't react. In surgery, we call this emotional hemorrhage. If you react too quickly, things get worse. My father leaned closer. Everything Emily has comes from me. Her house, her trust fund, this wedding, mine. He tapped the table. Don't forget that. Then he walked away. Margaret followed. And that was the moment I realized something important. Emily hadn't invited me just to attend a wedding. She invited me for something else. Something my father definitely didn't know about. And whatever it was coming before the night ended. Dinner began at exactly 7:30 p.m. 180 guests filled the ballroom, and the staff moved through the tables like clockwork. White gloves, silver trays, perfect timing. Aspen weddings are like that. Everything choreographed, everything expensive. Everything designed to make wealthy people feel like the world runs on their schedule. I sat at table 18 beside the service door, listening to plates clink and quiet conversations ripple through the room. Nobody at my table spoke to me. 4 strangers, 2 couples. The kind of polite silence people use when they've already decided what they think about you. Across the room, table 1 glowed like its own small planet. My father sat at the center, Margaret beside him, Emily and Daniel to the right. My father laughed at something one of his business partners said. The sound carried across the ballroom, confident, satisfied. The laugh of a man who believed he had already won. If you've ever been the person at the table nobody wants to talk to, you know that feeling. Not anger, not even embarrassment, just observation. You sit there quietly and watch everything. And sometimes, the quietest person in the room learns the most. A waiter refilled my wine glass. Pinot Noir, probably $90 a bottle. I took a sip. 2 tables over, someone whispered, "That's the older daughter. I heard she dropped out of college." No, I heard she joined the military or something. Didn't she disappear? The story had grown in 16 years. It always does. My father had built a version of me that fit his narrative, and no one had ever bothered checking the facts. Halfway through the salad course, Margaret approached. She moved through the room like a queen inspecting her court. When she reached my table, she rested one hand on the back of my chair. "Everyone, this is Richard's eldest daughter." Her voice carried easily. "She left home at 18, never finished school." Margaret tilted her head slightly. "Tell us again, Lillian. What exactly do you do now?" The table went quiet, everyone waiting. This was the moment she expected me to confirm her story. I folded my napkin carefully. "I'm a surgeon." Margaret blinked once. "Oh." She recovered quickly. "What kind?" "Trauma surgery, Denver General. I work emergency response." She smiled politely. "That sounds stressful." "It is." One of the men at the table leaned forward. "How long does that take?" "Medical school, residency, 10 years. Margaret laughed softly. 10 years and you're still in a hospital?" Her tone implied something unfinished, something disappointing. "Some people never quite find the right path." The table chuckled awkwardly. But the woman sitting 2 seats away from me hadn't laughed. Her name card read Catherine Whitaker, early 50s. Sharp eyes. The kind of woman who notices details. She looked down at my wrist, specifically at the faint scar along the base of my thumb. Surgical scar. She studied it longer than necessary. Then she looked up at me again. Interesting. Margaret wasn't finished. "So, no husband? No children? Just long hours and hospital work?" "Just hospital work." I smiled. "You'd be surprised how many lives that involves." Margaret patted my shoulder. "Well, at least someone has to do it." Then she walked away. The man beside me leaned closer. "Don't take it personally. Margaret does that to everyone." I nodded. I wasn't offended. I was curious. Because none of this explained Emily's words earlier. "Something is going to happen tonight. Trust me." Across the room, Emily sat quietly beside Daniel, her hands folded in her lap, but her eyes kept finding mine. Each time they did, she gave a tiny nod. "Wait." My father stood 15 minutes later. He tapped his glass with a fork. The room fell silent. "To family," he began. His voice carried easily. 30 years ago, I started Hartwell Financial in a rented office with one desk and a calculator. Today, we manage over $600 million in assets. Polite applause. My father raised his glass. "And none of it would have been possible without family loyalty." Another pause. Another glance toward my table. Some people understand that loyalty. Others choose different paths. Several guests shifted uncomfortably. The message was clear. Emily always understood what family means. He placed a hand on her shoulder. "And tonight, we celebrate her marriage. But more importantly," he smiled, "we celebrate the children who stayed." The words landed exactly where he wanted them to. The room applauded. I lifted my wine glass calmly. 16 years earlier, that speech would have destroyed me. Tonight, it felt like listening to a stranger. Across the room, Emily's hands tightened around her napkin, her jaw set. Daniel leaned close and whispered something to her. She nodded once, then slowly stood up. I didn't know what she was about to do, but whatever it was, my sister had been planning it for a long time. Before she reached the stage, someone else stood first. My father's business partner, Victor Langford, 65, real estate developer, the kind of man who measured worth in net worth. He walked to my table carrying a glass of whiskey. Mind if I sit? He didn't wait for permission. Victor studied me. So you're the famous daughter. I suppose that depends who's telling the story. He chuckled. Fair point. Then he leaned forward. Your father says you ran off and wasted your education. I didn't answer. Victor took a sip of whiskey. What do surgeons make these days? 200, 300,000? Something like that. He swirled the drink. I spend that on ski maintenance for my chalet. The table laughed nervously. But Victor wasn't done. He gestured toward my hands. Those the hands that save lives? Sometimes. He leaned back. Let me give you some advice. The real world runs on money, not hero stories. I held his gaze. Maybe. But when someone stops breathing, money isn't what restarts their heart. He smirked. Cute answer. Then he stood. Enjoy the wedding, doctor. He returned to table 1 beside my father. They clinked glasses. 2 men congratulating each other on a victory they thought was already sealed. But across the room, Emily had reached the stage. She picked up the microphone. Her hands trembled slightly. The band stopped playing. The room turned toward her. My father leaned back confidently. He expected gratitude. Instead, Emily said something that changed the temperature of the entire room. Before we cut the cake, she said slowly, there's someone here tonight I need to thank. Her eyes moved across the ballroom, past the centerpieces, past the champagne tower, past every expensive table, until they landed on mine. 16 years ago, my sister left this family. A ripple of whispers spread instantly. Emily kept going. Most of you only heard one version of that story. My father sat forward slightly. Margaret's smile froze. Emily took a breath. 7 years ago, she said, I almost died. The room went silent. Even the kitchen behind me stopped making noise. I drove off a mountain road during a snowstorm. My car rolled into a ravine. The impact collapsed the driver's door. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The ambulance couldn't reach me for nearly 20 minutes. My heart began beating faster. Emily's voice shook. And a trauma surgeon happened to be driving home from a hospital shift. She stopped her car, climbed down that ravine, and pulled me out. The murmurs started immediately. She performed emergency thoracic decompression right there in the snow. Emily looked directly at me, with a pocket knife, because my lung had collapsed. The ballroom erupted with whispers. I had never told anyone about that night. Not even Emily knew everything. But the question forming in everyone's mind was the same. How did she know? Emily held up a folder. 2 years ago, I requested the accident report and the responding doctor's name. She opened it slowly. And that's when I discovered something that changed everything. The trauma surgeon who saved my life, she paused, was my sister. Every head in the ballroom turned toward table 18, toward me. My father didn't move, but Margaret's hand slipped off his arm. And for the first time that night, Richard Hartwell looked uncertain. But the biggest shock of the night hadn't happened yet, because Emily wasn't even halfway finished talking. The moment Emily said my name, the entire ballroom shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but you could feel it. 180 people, quietly recalculating what they thought they knew. The kind of silence that spreads when a story suddenly stops making sense. My father didn't move. He sat perfectly still at table 1, fingers wrapped around his wine glass, eyes fixed on Emily like he was waiting for her to correct herself. Margaret leaned toward him. Her lips moved, but no sound reached the rest of us. Emily stood under the spotlight, holding the microphone with both hands. 7 years ago, she continued, I drove off Pine Ridge Pass during a blizzard. Her voice was steadier now. The road was iced over. My car slid through the guardrail and rolled almost 30 feet down the ravine. A woman at table 9 covered her mouth. Emily continued. The driver's side door collapsed inward. My ribs were broken. My lung collapsed. I couldn't breathe. Her eyes never left mine. A car stopped on the road above. Someone climbed down the ravine, in the snow, in the dark, without equipment. The room was completely silent now. Emily lifted the folder in her hand. The accident report says the responding physician performed an emergency needle thoracostomy using a pocket knife and a hollow barrel of a pen. Gasps moved across the ballroom. Anyone with even basic medical knowledge knew what that meant. It meant someone had punctured my sister's chest on the side of a mountain to release the pressure collapsing her lung, a procedure normally done in an emergency room, with sterile equipment, not in a snowstorm. Emily smiled slightly. That doctor stayed with me until the ambulance arrived 23 minutes later. She squeezed the microphone. I asked the paramedics her name. They said she had already left. The whispers began. Why would she leave? Emily answered that question before anyone could ask it. Because she didn't want recognition. She just wanted to make sure I lived. Her eyes locked on mine again. For 5 years, I didn't know who that doctor was. Then 2 years ago, I requested the full incident report from the county. The ballroom felt smaller now, like the walls had moved closer. Emily opened the folder slowly. The responding physician was identified as Dr. Lillian Hartwell, my sister. A wave of sound rolled across the room. Shock, confusion, people turning toward me, some standing slightly in their chairs to get a better look. My father's face had gone pale. Margaret looked like someone had pulled the ground out from under her. But Emily wasn't finished. For 16 years, she said quietly, my father told everyone that Lillian abandoned this family, that she threw away her future, that she couldn't succeed. Her voice hardened. But the night I almost died, the person who saved me wasn't a billionaire. It wasn't a CEO. It wasn't someone with a ski house in Aspen. She looked directly at my father. It was the daughter you erased. The room erupted into whispers. My father stood abruptly. Emily? His voice cut across the room. That's enough. But Emily didn't stop. You kicked her out when she was 18. You told people she failed. You told everyone she ran away. She held up the accident report. But she was in medical school. She became a trauma surgeon. And she saved my life. A man at a nearby table leaned toward his wife. Did he really kick her out? The whisper carried farther than intended. Margaret stepped toward the stage. Emily, sweetheart. Emily stepped back. No, not tonight. The room froze. Emily looked at the crowd. You all believed the story you were told. But here's the truth. My sister didn't abandon us. We abandoned her. Silence. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Then something unexpected happened. The woman beside me at table 18 stood up. Catherine Whitaker. She turned toward the room. Dr. Hartwell? I looked up. Yes? She smiled slightly. I'm Catherine Whitaker, Chief of Surgery at St. Luke's Medical Center in Denver. A ripple of recognition spread through the room. Even people who didn't know hospitals knew that name. She gestured toward me. And I can confirm everything Emily just said. She turned to the guests. Doctor, Hartwell completed one of the most competitive trauma residencies in the country. Top 5%. She folded her arms. And she's one of the best emergency surgeons I've ever worked with. Now the whispers turned into something else. Respect. Curiosity. My father's expression darkened. Catherine wasn't done. She looked toward him. And if she was the physician who treated Emily on Pine Ridge Pass, then your daughter performed a field thoracostomy with improvised equipment in a blizzard. She paused. That's not just impressive. That's extraordinary. The room was silent again. My father looked around. He was losing control of the narrative, and he hated that. He laughed. A short, dismissive sound. Anyone can exaggerate a story. Emily stepped forward again. Actually, Dad, she nodded toward Daniel. My fiancé works in structural engineering. He helped me pull the emergency response records. Daniel tapped something on a tablet beside the stage. The projector behind them lit up. A document appeared on the screen. County Emergency Medical Services Incident Report. The text was clear. Patient stabilized by civilian physician prior to EMS arrival. Procedure performed. Emergency thoracic decompression. Attending physician identified as Dr. Lillian Hartwell. My father stared at the screen. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. For 16 years he'd controlled the story. Tonight, the facts were on a 40-inch screen, and facts don't care about pride. Emily lowered the microphone slightly. Lily, her voice softened, you never told anyone what you did that night. Why? The room turned toward me again. 180 people waiting for an answer. I stood slowly. My chair scraped the floor. I didn't walk to the stage. I stayed where I was. Because surgeons learned something early. You don't chase attention. You let the truth come to you. I spoke calmly, because that's the job. Emily blinked. What do you mean? I looked around the room. When someone stops breathing, you help them. You don't wait for applause. You don't ask who their father is. You just act. The silence deepened. I looked at my sister. You were my patient that night, not my sister. Emily's eyes filled with tears. The applause began somewhere near the back of the room. One person, then 2, then 20. Soon half the ballroom was clapping. My father stood motionless in the center of it. But the applause wasn't the moment that changed the night. The moment came 30 seconds later. Because at table 1, the man who had mocked my career earlier, Victor Langford, suddenly dropped his glass. The whiskey shattered on the marble floor. Victor grabbed his chest, his chair tipped backward, and then he collapsed. The glass shattered first, crystal against marble, sharp enough that every head in the ballroom turned. Then, Victor Langford fell out of his chair. The sound of his body hitting the floor echoed louder than the music that had been playing seconds earlier. For half a heartbeat, nobody moved. Victor clutched his chest, his face twisted. Then his eyes rolled back. He stopped responding. Margaret screamed. Someone knocked over a chair. A waiter dropped an entire tray of champagne glasses. The room erupted into chaos. 180 well-dressed people, suddenly unsure what to do when real life interrupted their evening. I was already moving. Training does that to you. You stop thinking about the room. You focus on the patient. Male, mid-60s, sudden collapse, hand to chest, unresponsive. Possible cardiac arrest. I crossed 20 feet of marble floor in seconds and dropped beside him. Give me space. My voice cut through the noise. It wasn't loud, but it carried the authority of someone used to being obeyed. The crowd stepped back. Victor lay on his side, gray skin, shallow breathing. I turned him onto his back. Victor, can you hear me? No response. I checked his pulse. Nothing. My voice sharpened. Call 911, now. A young server sprinted toward the lobby. I loosened Victor's tie and opened the top buttons of his shirt. Then I placed my hands at the center of his chest. Interlocked fingers, locked elbows. Compression started immediately. 1, 2, 3. The ballroom had gone silent, the kind of silence that only happens when people realize they're watching the difference between life and death. 30 compressions, 2 breaths, repeat. I counted out loud, because counting keeps the rhythm, and rhythm keeps people alive. Victor's wife stood frozen beside me, her hands shaking. Is he going to die? I didn't answer, because emergency medicine doesn't deal in promises. It deals in actions. Is there an AED in this building? A manager shouted from across the room. Yes, bring it here, now. I kept compressions going, 100 beats per minute, exactly where they needed to be. 30 compressions, 2 breaths, again. My dress was wrinkled at the knees now, hair falling loose. None of it mattered. Because at that moment, Victor Langford was just another patient. Not the man who mocked my career 30 minutes earlier. Not my father's wealthy friend. Just a man whose heart had stopped. The AED arrived within a minute. A young staff member dropped the case beside me, hands shaking. I opened it, turned the device on. The machine spoke immediately. Apply pads to patient's bare chest. I tore open Victor's shirt, placed the pads. Clear. Everyone back. The crowd stepped further away. The machine analyzed. Shock advised. I pressed the button. Victor's body jerked slightly. The monitor beeped. Flatline. No pulse. Again. Back to compressions. 1, 2, 3. Somewhere in the room, a woman began crying. Victor's wife covered her mouth. My father stood 10 feet away, watching. Silent. 30 compressions, 2 breaths, repeat. The AED beeped again. Analyzing rhythm. Shock advised. Clear. Second shock. Victor's chest lifted, then dropped. Still nothing. I kept going. My arms burned. We rains down the back of my neck, but stopping wasn't an option. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. The AED spoke again. Analyzing rhythm. This time the tone changed. Pulse detected. Victor's chest rose, then fell, then rose again. He coughed. A harsh, wet sound. Air rushed back into his lungs. Someone gasped loudly. Victor blinked, confused, disoriented. I rolled him onto his side, recovery position. Easy, you're okay, stay still. The sirens outside arrived seconds later. Paramedics rushed in with the stretcher. 2 EMTs knelt beside us. What happened? Sudden collapse, probable cardiac arrest. 2 shocks delivered, pulse restored. The paramedic checked Victor's vitals. He looked at me. Who started CPR? I nodded slightly. He shook his head in quiet respect. You saved his life. Victor opened his eyes fully now. They landed on me. Recognition slowly appeared. The surgeon he mocked earlier. The same hands restarting his heart. His voice was weak. Doctor, I'm sorry. I squeezed his shoulder gently. Don't talk. Just breathe. The paramedics lifted him onto the stretcher. His wife followed, crying quietly. Within minutes, they were gone, and the ballroom was silent again. 180 people staring at me, some still standing, some still holding glasses they'd forgotten to drink from. My hands trembled slightly now, adrenaline fading. Emily stepped beside me, her voice soft. Lily. I shook my head. Just give me a second. I stood slowly, straightened my dress. The room watched every movement, because moments like that reset the balance of a room. 30 minutes earlier, I had been the daughter who ran away. Now, I was the woman who saved a life on their dance floor. Catherine Whitaker approached first. She folded her arms. Calm, professional. Still the best trauma surgeon I know. I smiled faintly. Thanks, Catherine. Behind her, several guests stepped closer. A man in a navy suit shook my hand. That was incredible. Another woman nodded. You didn't hesitate for a second. But the most important reaction came from the one person who had said nothing. My father. Richard Hartwell walked toward me slowly. The room parted for him. 16 years of distance stood between us in that moment. He stopped 2 feet away, looked at my hands. The same hands he once called a waste of talent. He opened his mouth, but no words came out, because the room already knew something he was just realizing. The daughter he erased had just saved his best friend's life, and the entire ballroom had witnessed it. But the real turning point of the night was still coming, because Emily walked back toward the stage, picked up the microphone again, and said something that made my father's face go completely pale. Dad, she said calmly, there's something else everyone deserves to know tonight. When Emily said that, the room changed again. Not chaos this time, something quieter, more dangerous, the kind of silence that happens when people sense the real truth hasn't even started yet. My father stood 10 feet from me, hands at his sides, still trying to process what had just happened. His business partner had flatlined on the ballroom floor, and the daughter he'd spent 16 years discrediting had restarted the man's heart in front of everyone who mattered to him. Emily lifted the microphone again. The spotlight above the stage reflected off the snowflake embroidery on her dress. For a second, she looked like the little sister I remembered, the kid who used to steal my sweaters and follow me around the house. But when she spoke again, her voice belonged to someone else. Stronger, clearer. David told everyone for years that Lily threw away her future. A murmur moved through the room. My father stepped forward. Emily, no. She didn't raise her voice, but that single word stopped him. Not tonight. Emily looked around the ballroom slowly, 180 guests watching her. I want everyone here to understand something. My sister didn't fail. She didn't run away. She was forced out. The whispering started again. Margaret crossed her arms tightly. Emily continued. 16 years ago, my father gave Lily an ultimatum. Give up medical school and work for the family company, or leave. She paused. When Lily chose medicine, Dad put her suitcase on the porch and locked the door behind her. The reaction this time was louder, not just whispers, actual gasps. Several guests turned toward my father. Because wealth protects reputations, but it doesn't protect cruelty once people hear it clearly. My father's voice cut through the room. That's enough. Emily didn't move. No, it isn't. She looked directly at him. You told everyone she quit school, that she drifted through life, that she wasted everything you gave her. My father clenched his jaw. Emily raised a second folder. But the truth is a little different. She opened it slowly. 2 years ago, when I started looking into the accident report, I also started looking into Lily's life. She held up a printed document. Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, graduation record, top 10% of her class. A ripple moved through the crowd. Emily flipped the page. University of Colorado Trauma Residency, Chief Resident. Another page. Board certification, emergency trauma surgery. The whispers grew louder. Emily looked back toward my father. So no, she didn't run away. She became one of the best trauma surgeons in Colorado. Catherine Whitaker nodded once from across the room. Several guests began murmuring approval. But Emily wasn't finished. And this next part was the moment everything shifted from uncomfortable to irreversible. She placed the documents on the podium. Dad told everyone Lily abandoned the family, but what he never mentioned, Emily paused, was what happened after she left. My father's face tightened. Emily, don't. Her voice was calm, too calm. 7 months after Lily moved out, Mom's medical bills were still unpaid. The ballroom went silent again, because everyone in that room knew the story of our mother. Emily spoke slowly. Mom died from lung complications, and the hospital bills totaled $286,000. The number hung in the air. Emily continued. Dad refused to pay them. Someone at the back of the room said quietly, "What?" Emily nodded. He said the hospital made mistakes, that insurance should cover it. So he fought the charges in court. Margaret shifted uneasily beside him. But that's not the important part. Emily picked up another document, because while he was fighting those bills, Lily was working 2 jobs in medical school and sending money. You paid for Mom's chemo treatments, Lily. You just never told anyone. I hadn't expected that to come out. My throat tightened. Across the room, my father looked at me differently now, like he was seeing something unfamiliar. But the room wasn't done shifting, because the people who had ignored me earlier were beginning to move closer. Catherine Whitaker stepped beside me again, quietly. You never told anyone that either. I shook my head. It wasn't important. She studied me for a second. Actually, it was. Across the ballroom, Emily lowered the microphone slightly. I spent 2 years gathering the truth, because my sister deserved better than the story people told about her. Then she looked at the crowd, and finally she asked something that made the room hold its breath. "So let me ask everyone here something." She paused. "If someone saves your life, pays your mother's hospital bills, and becomes a surgeon who saves hundreds of others, does that sound like failure?" The room answered immediately, "No," louder than anyone expected. My father closed his eyes briefly, because the narrative he'd controlled for 16 years had just collapsed. But the moment wasn't finished yet. Emily looked down at the podium, then back at me. "There's one more thing." Her voice dropped slightly. "Something none of you know yet." My father's eyes snapped open. "Emily, don't do this." She looked at him calmly. "I think it's time." Then she lifted the final document, the one that made my father turn completely pale. Because this wasn't about the past anymore. This was about something he had done much more recently. And in less than 30 seconds, every person in that ballroom was about to learn the truth. The room had reached that fragile moment where everyone was holding their breath. Emily stood at the podium with one last document in her hand. My father knew exactly what it was. You could see it in his face. The confidence he'd worn all night was gone, replaced by something raw, fear. Emily didn't rush. That was the thing about my sister. She had spent 2 years preparing this moment. 2 years learning patience. 2 years gathering facts, while my father continued telling the same old story. She looked at the document once more, then back at the room. "Most of you here know my father as a successful financial advisor." "Emily, that's private business." She ignored him. "Because the night I nearly died, Lily asked me something that stuck with me." Emily looked at me briefly. She asked if Dad was doing okay financially. I remembered that conversation, 7 years earlier, in the hospital after her accident. Emily had laughed when I asked. "Of course he is. Dad's richer than ever." But Emily continued speaking. That answer didn't sit right with me, so I started checking. My father's voice sharpened. "You had no right." Emily didn't even glance at people turning toward my father. Some of those people were his own clients. Emily continued. "The transfers weren't listed in client statements. They weren't listed in company disclosures." My father's face went rigid. "The preliminary conclusion is that those funds were diverted." My father snapped. "That's a lie." But Emily calmly finished the sentence. "Diverted into private investment." My father raised both hands. "Everyone calm down. This is a misunderstanding." Emily shook her head slowly. "It isn't." Marge grabbed his arm. A tall man with... The speaker was an older man with a military posture. 70 maybe. Weathered face, sharp eyes. He stood slowly. "Name's Robert Gallagher, retired Navy commander." He gestured toward the stage. "Your sister just told this room who you really are." He paused. "But I think there's something else people should know." The room quieted again. I frowned slightly. Commander Gallagher looked directly at me. 7 years ago, Pine Ridge Pass accident. You remember who called the rescue helicopter? My mind flickered back to that night. Snow, the ravine, Emily barely breathing. You did. He nodded. "I was the one who found her car. And I watched you climb down that mountain in a blizzard." A murmur moved through the room. He continued. "What these people don't know is that when the ambulance finally arrived, the paramedics told you your own car had slid halfway off the road." Another gasp. I remembered that moment. Barely. The ice had shifted under my tires. My car was hanging near the guardrail. Gallagher's voice grew quieter. "You could have died that night, too. You still stayed with her." His eyes moved across the room. "So while everyone here is debating money, I just want to say something simple." He looked back at me. "You're the bravest damn doctor I've ever met." The applause came slowly, then stronger. Because moments like that change the room in ways facts alone can't. But my father didn't hear the applause. He was staring at Emily, his voice low, cold. "You've destroyed this family tonight." Emily answered calmly. "No." She glanced toward me. "You did that a long time ago." The ballroom doors opened suddenly. 2 uniformed officers stepped inside, and every head turned. Because someone had called the police, and they weren't there for the medical emergency. They were there for my father. The ballroom doors opened slowly. 2 uniformed officers stepped inside, followed by a third man in a dark blazer carrying a leather folder. The music had stopped. The staff had stopped moving. Even the chandeliers seemed quieter somehow. 180 guests watched the officers cross the marble floor toward the center of the room, toward my father. Richard Hartwell had spent 30 years being the most powerful man in every room he entered. Tonight was the first time that power failed him. One of the officers spoke. "Richard Hartwell?" My father's voice came out tight. "Yes." The man in the blazer stepped forward. "Colorado Division of Securities. My name is Daniel Ortega." He opened the folder. "We've received a financial fraud complaint regarding Hartwell Financial." The words hung in the air like a crack in glass. My father lifted his chin. "This is a private event." Ortega nodded. "Understood. But the complaint involves potential misappropriation of client funds exceeding $9 million. The whispering began instantly. $9 million? Oh my God. My father looked toward Emily. His expression had shifted again. Not fear this time. Anger. Cold. Controlled. "You called them." Emily didn't flinch. "I reported what I found." Ortega continued calmly. "Mr. Hartwell, we're not here to arrest you tonight, but we do need to ask you a few questions regarding certain financial transfers." He slid a document forward. "If you could step outside with us." My father didn't move. For 10 full seconds. The entire ballroom waited. Then Margaret whispered something to him, too quietly to hear. But whatever she said broke the stalemate. My father straightened his jacket. "Of course." He forced a smile toward the room. "Just a misunderstanding. Accounting discrepancies happen." He turned toward the officers. "Gentlemen, shall we?" They walked toward the terrace doors together. And just like that, the man who had ruled this room all night disappeared outside. The doors closed behind them. The silence that followed felt strange, like the air had shifted pressure. Then the whispering exploded. People stood. Groups formed instantly. Phones appeared, investors talking urgently. "My financial advisor is with him. We need to call someone." "Do you think the money is gone?" Margaret remained frozen beside the head table. She looked suddenly smaller, the kind of small that happens when someone realizes the ground beneath them wasn't solid after all. Across the room, Emily stepped down from the stage. Her hands were shaking now, the adrenaline finally catching up. She walked toward me slowly. "Did I go too far?" Her voice was quiet. I looked at her. "No, you told the truth." She exhaled, 16 years of tension leaving her shoulders. "Good, because I couldn't keep pretending anymore." Daniel joined us. He placed a hand gently on her back. "You did the right thing." Emily nodded. Then she glanced toward the terrace doors. "Do you think they'll arrest him?" I didn't answer immediately, because I knew something about moments like this. Justice rarely happens quickly. But truth moves fast once it starts. Across the room, Commander Gallagher approached again. He stopped beside me. "Your sister just detonated a bomb in that man's life." Emily winced slightly. He wasn't criticizing. He was stating a fact. Gallagher continued. "You know what's interesting, though?" "What?" He gestured around the ballroom. "Nobody looks shocked about the fraud. They look shocked about you." Emily frowned. "What do you mean?" Gallagher's voice softened. "Because they all believed Richard Hartwell's story. About the daughter who failed. Now they're realizing something uncomfortable." He glanced toward me. "The strongest person in this family was the one they ignored." Emily looked down. "I should have fought harder for you back then." I shook my head. "You were 16. There wasn't anything you could do." She looked up again. "Still, I should have tried." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then something unexpected happened. The ballroom doors opened again. Not the terrace doors, the main entrance. A man in a gray suit stepped inside. Mid-40s, serious expression, carrying a black briefcase. He looked around the room quickly, then walked directly toward me. "Dr. Lillian Hartwell?" I nodded cautiously. "Yes?" He extended a hand. "Michael Chen, Hospital Legal Counsel for Denver General." My stomach tightened slightly. Hospital lawyers rarely show up at weddings. "Is something wrong?" Chen shook his head. "Not wrong. Unexpected." He opened the briefcase, removed a sealed envelope. "Earlier tonight, I received an urgent call from the Colorado Medical Board." He handed me the envelope. "This is for you." Emily leaned closer. "What is it?" I tore the envelope open carefully. Inside was a letter, official letterhead, State of Colorado. I read the first sentence silently, then the second. Emily watched my face. "Lily? What does it say?" I looked up slowly. The words felt unreal, even in my own mouth. "It says the board reviewed the Pine Ridge Pass incident report." Emily blinked. "Okay." I swallowed once. "And they're recommending me for the state's Civilian Medal of Valor." The room went quiet again. Because that kind of honor almost never happens to doctors. But Chen wasn't finished. He slid a second document across the table. "There's something else." "What?" He pointed to the page. "Denver General wants to appoint you as Director of Trauma Services, effective immediately." Emily stared. "Wait, that's the head position." I nodded slowly. "Yes." Commander Gallagher chuckled softly. "Well, that's one hell of a promotion." But before anyone could say another word, the terrace doors opened again. My father walked back inside. His face looked 10 years older than it had 30 minutes earlier. And this time, he wasn't alone. 2 investigators followed him, carrying a document folder thick enough that everyone in the room could see it. My father looked around the ballroom, at the guests, at Emily, at me. And for the first time all night, he looked like a man who knew he had already lost. But what he said next surprised everyone, especially me. Because instead of defending himself, he looked directly at me and said something I never expected to hear. "Lillian, we need to talk. Alone." When my father said that, the room quieted again. Not because people respected the request, but because everyone was curious what would happen next. 16 years without speaking. 2 hours of public collapse. And now he wanted a private conversation. I studied his face. Richard Hartwell had always looked composed, controlled, even when angry. Tonight, the control was still there, but it looked thinner, like a surface stretched too tightly over something cracking underneath. "Alone." He repeated the word quietly. I glanced toward Emily. She shook her head immediately. "Lily, you don't have to. It's okay." I placed a hand lightly on her shoulder. "Really?" My father gestured toward the terrace. Cold air spilled in through the open door. Outside, the mountains were dark, snow reflecting the lights from the resort. I walked past the tables, past the guests who suddenly seemed very interested in their wine glasses, past Margaret, who avoided looking at me entirely, then out onto the terrace. The door closed behind us. For the first time that night, there were no witnesses, just the sound of the fountain below and the distant wind moving through pine trees. My father stood beside the stone railing, hands gripping the edge. He didn't speak for almost 30 seconds. When he finally did, his voice sounded unfamiliar, quieter. I didn't know. I leaned against the railing across from him. Didn't know what. He stared out at the snow. "About the money you sent for your mother. Emily showed me the records tonight." He swallowed once. $27,000. While you were in medical school. I didn't answer, because there was nothing useful to add. He continued. "Your mother's treatment cost nearly $300,000. I fought the hospital because I thought they were overcharging. You thought you were protecting the family. Yes. I watched his shoulders rise and fall slowly. But I didn't know you were helping. He looked at me then. For 16 years, I believed you left because you didn't care. I met his eyes. You never asked. The wind moved across the terrace. My father looked away again. No, I didn't. He took a long breath. The investigators are reviewing everything, the transfers, the accounts. I waited. There's a good chance they'll freeze Hartwell Financial by morning. The words sounded heavy, like he was saying them out loud for the first time. I asked quietly, "Did you move the money?" He didn't answer immediately. Then he nodded once. Yes. The honesty surprised me. Not stolen, invested. Private development project in Utah. The return would have been 3 times the original amount, but the market collapsed last winter. The air between us grew still. How much did you lose? He looked down at his hands. Almost all of it. $9.4 million. I exhaled slowly. That explained the panic behind everything tonight. The speeches, the cruelty, the desperate attempt to control the room. My father had been standing on a financial cliff, and everyone in that ballroom was about to find out. He spoke again. The investigation will take months, maybe longer, but the damage is already done. Investors will withdraw. The firm will collapse. He rubbed his forehead. 30 years of work. Gone. I watched him quietly, because this moment mattered more than anything he had said earlier. It was the moment after pride breaks, and people either rebuild themselves or double down on the lie. My father looked up again. You saved Victor Langford tonight. Yes. He laughed once, short, without humor. That man has $4 million invested with me. I didn't respond. If he dies, the lawsuit destroys everything. If he lives, maybe I have time to fix it. His eyes met mine again. You didn't know that when you helped him. No. He nodded slowly. Of course you didn't. That's the difference between us. The words hung in the cold air. Then he asked something unexpected. Why did you never tell anyone about Emily, about the mountain, about any of it? I answered honestly. Because that's not why I became a doctor. He studied my face carefully, looking for something, maybe resentment, maybe anger. But what he saw instead confused him. Calm. 16 years had sanded the edges off my anger. I had built a life without him. He finally asked the question that had been waiting all night. Can you forgive me? The wind moved again. Snow brushed across the terrace floor. Forgiveness is a complicated thing. It doesn't erase history. It doesn't undo choices. I thought about the night I left home, my suitcase on the porch, Emily crying upstairs. I thought about medical school, the loans, the night shifts, the patients who never made it, and the ones who did. Then I answered. I already did. His eyebrows lifted slightly. When? Years ago. He looked confused. Why? Because carrying anger for 16 years would have ruined my life. The honesty landed harder than accusation. My father stared at the mountains for a long moment. Then he said something almost too quiet to hear. Your mother would have been proud of you. The words hit deeper than anything else he'd said. I nodded once. I know. Another long silence passed. Finally, he turned toward the door. The investigators are waiting. I pushed away from the railing. Yes. We walked back toward the ballroom together, not side by side, but not as far apart as we had been before. Inside the room had changed again. Clusters of guests talking quietly, phones still out. Emily stood near the stage with Daniel. She looked up when we entered, concern flickering across her face. I gave her a small nod. Everything's okay. My father stopped near the entrance. The investigators approached immediately. Mr. Hartwell, we're going to need you to come with us now. He nodded. Of course. Then something unexpected happened. He turned back toward the room, toward everyone, and for the first time that night, Richard Hartwell raised his voice without arrogance. Ladies and gentlemen, Conversation stopped. He continued. I owe this room an apology. The guests watched carefully, especially the ones who trusted him with their money. He gestured toward me. 16 years ago, I told you my eldest daughter failed. He paused. Tonight, you learned the truth. My daughter didn't fail. I did. The silence in the room deepened. Because accountability, real accountability, is something people rarely see. My father looked at me one last time. Then the investigators escorted him out of the ballroom. The doors closed behind them. And just like that, Richard Hartwell's empire walked out of the room. Emily rushed toward me. Lily, are you okay? I smiled slightly. Yeah. She studied my face carefully. What did he say to you out there? I hesitated, then answered honestly. He told me something about Mom. Emily leaned closer. What? I looked toward the empty terrace doors. He said she would have been proud of us. Emily's eyes filled with tears. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then Daniel cleared his throat gently. Well, he glanced around the ballroom, that might be the most dramatic wedding reception in Colorado history. Emily laughed through her tears. Probably. But the night wasn't over yet, because at that exact moment, someone across the room shouted my name. Doctor! I turned, and what I saw made my stomach drop. Because the paramedics had just come back, and they were carrying Victor Langford again. When I saw the stretcher coming through the ballroom doors again, the first thing I noticed was the speed. Paramedics don't move that fast unless something is wrong. Very wrong. The two EMTs pushed the stretcher straight through the entrance. Victor Langford lay on it. His skin had the gray tone I recognized instantly. Not good. Not stable. The room erupted again. Didn't they already take him to the hospital? What happened? Victor's wife rushed forward, her voice shaking. What's wrong with him? One of the paramedics answered quickly. His heart stopped again in the ambulance. Every medical instinct in my body sharpened. They had already shocked him once tonight, which meant his heart was unstable, and if it stopped twice, the third time could be fatal. They stopped the stretcher near the center of the ballroom. The lead medic spotted me immediately. Doctor, we need help. I stepped forward. What happened? The medic spoke fast. He regained pulse after the second shock, but 10 minutes into transport, he went back into ventricular tachycardia. We shocked him again. Pulse returned, but it's weak. Victor's chest moved shallowly, too shallow. His blood pressure must be crashing. The medic continued. The hospital is 20 minutes away in this weather. The road's icing over. We can't risk another arrest during transport. I understood immediately. They needed to stabilize him, now. And the closest experienced trauma physician in the room was me. I looked down at Victor. His eyes fluttered, barely conscious. The man who had mocked my career an hour earlier. The man whose money might destroy my father. None of that mattered now. He was a patient. What do you need? The paramedic nodded toward their equipment bag. IV kit, fluids, and if his rhythm collapses again, we'll need another shock. I rolled up the sleeves of my dress. Let's move. The ballroom cleared again, guests backing away, staff pushing tables aside. Someone turned off the music completely. The room felt like an emergency room now. Controlled chaos. I inserted the IV first. Vein in the left arm. Good flow. Fluids started immediately. Victor groaned weakly. Stay with me, Victor. He barely responded. His wife knelt beside the stretcher. Is he going to die? I met her eyes. We're not there yet. The monitor beeped sharply. Victor's heart rhythm spiked again. The paramedic checked the screen. Damn. Ventricular tachycardia. That meant the heart was beating too fast to pump blood properly. If it continued, it would crash again. I looked at the AED monitor. Charge it. The machine began whining. Charging. The paramedic placed the paddles. Clear. Everyone stepped back again. Shock delivered. Victor's body jerked. The monitor beeped. Pause. Then the rhythm returned. weak, but stable. The paramedic exhaled slowly. Nice call. I checked Victor's pulse. Still there. Stronger this time. For now. But the situation was far from over. I looked toward the medic. How long until the ambulance can move again? He glanced at the icy windows. Maybe 10 minutes? The roads are clearing. I nodded. Good. Victor's eyes opened slightly. He looked at me again. Doctor. His voice was barely air. I squeezed his shoulder gently. Save your strength. But he forced the words out. Tell Richard. I frowned slightly. Tell him what? Victor struggled to breathe. The words came broken. The Utah Project. My chest tightened. Utah? Victor continued weakly. I was the one who convinced him. The paramedic looked at me. What's he talking about? I didn't answer, because suddenly something from my conversation with my father on the terrace came rushing back. $9.4 million. Private development project in Utah. Victor grabbed my wrist weakly. It wasn't supposed to fail. The monitor beeped steadily beside us. He was fading again. I leaned closer. Victor, focus on breathing. But he forced one more sentence out. If the investors find out, I guaranteed the deal. His eyes closed briefly. They'll come after Richard. The meaning hit immediately. Victor Langford hadn't just invested money. He had convinced other clients to join the project, including my father, which meant the entire disaster wasn't only my father's mistake. Victor had pushed it, encouraged it, maybe even organized it. But the ballroom didn't know that. Not yet. The paramedic checked Victor's pulse again. Stable. We should move. I nodded. Agreed. They lifted the stretcher. Victor's wife followed beside them. Before they reached the doors, Victor looked back at me once more. Doctor. I leaned down. Yes? His voice was barely audible. Your father didn't steal the money. The words hit like ice water. He lost it, trying to save the firm. Then the stretcher rolled out the doors, and the ballroom fell silent again, because the man everyone now believed was a criminal might not actually be one. Emily walked slowly toward me. What did he say? I hesitated. The entire room watched my face now, waiting. The truth had changed again. And this time, the story wasn't as simple as anyone thought. I looked at Emily, then toward the empty terrace doors where my father had disappeared earlier, and quietly said something that made my sister's eyes widen. Emily, I think Dad might not be the villain everyone thinks he is. The moment I said that, Emily froze. The room was still loud with whispers, chairs moving, guests gathering their coats, people calling lawyers and financial advisors. But around us, a small circle of silence formed, because everyone close enough had heard what I said. Emily looked at me carefully. What do you mean? I glanced toward the doors where the ambulance had disappeared minutes earlier. Victor said something before they took him. Daniel leaned closer. What? I lowered my voice. The Utah Project. Daniel's eyebrows rose immediately. Emily frowned. Dad mentioned that earlier tonight. He said the money was invested there. Yes, but that's not the part that matters. I took a slow breath. Victor said he convinced Dad to invest. Emily's expression tightened. Wait, you mean Victor pushed him into it? Not just him. I looked toward the ballroom. Ver guaranteed the project to the other investors. Daniel's engineer brain caught up quickly. So everyone invested because Victor vouched for it. Exactly. Emily looked stunned. But that still means Dad moved their money. Yes. I didn't soften the truth. But it might not have been theft. It might have been a desperate gamble. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, trying to recover losses. Emily looked toward the door again. The investigators were still somewhere outside with my father. If Victor organized the deal, then Dad wasn't the only one responsible. No, but he was the one who moved the money, which meant legally, he was still in trouble. Emily exhaled slowly. This night just keeps getting worse. Across the room, clusters of guests were still talking urgently. Phones out, voices rising. My father's reputation had already collapsed, but the details behind that collapse were suddenly more complicated than anyone realized. Commander Gallagher stepped toward us again. I couldn't help overhearing. Retired Navy officers have a way of appearing quietly when things matter. He looked between us. Utah project? Daniel nodded. Apparently a development investment. Gallagher frowned slightly. I know something about those. Usually high risk. Emily crossed her arms. Dad never did high risk. That's why everyone trusted him. Gallagher nodded. Exactly. Which means someone had to convince him. I looked toward the doors again. Victor. Emily shook her head slowly. He almost died tonight. Yes, but that doesn't erase what he might have done. Daniel's voice dropped. If Victor guaranteed the investment, then half the people in this room probably followed him into it. We all looked around the ballroom again. Suddenly, the tension made sense. The panic, the angry phone calls, the whispered conversations. Because the missing money didn't just belong to strangers. It belonged to people standing 10 feet away. One of them approached us now, the silver-haired investor who had spoken earlier. $4.2 million. His name was Harold Kent. He walked straight toward me. Dr. Hartwell. I nodded politely. Mr. Kent. He studied my face. Your father moved my retirement account into that Utah deal. His voice was calm. Too calm. Did Victor Langford recommend it? Kent nodded once. Yes. He said the project was guaranteed. Guaranteed. The word hung in the air. Kent continued. I trusted him. Most of us did. Emily asked carefully. Did my father tell you that? No. Kent shook his head. Victor did. He leaned slightly closer. Your father actually warned me it was risky. Emily and I exchanged a look. Kent continued. But Victor insisted, said the project was already secured. Daniel exhaled quietly. That changes things. Kent studied us for another moment. Then he nodded once. Whatever happened tonight, I hope the truth comes out. He walked away. Emily whispered, Did you hear that? Yes, Dad warned them. Daniel's voice was thoughtful, which means he wasn't trying to scam them. He was trying to recover losses. The realization spread slowly between us. My father had made a terrible decision, but the story everyone believed might not be accurate. Emily looked toward the terrace doors again. The investigators had been outside with him for nearly 15 minutes now. What if they arrest him anyway? Daniel answered quietly. They might, because moving investor funds without approval is still illegal. Even if he meant to pay it back. Emily rubbed her forehead. God, I didn't want this to happen. I just wanted the truth. I placed a hand on her shoulder. You did the right thing. The truth matters. Across the ballroom, Margaret suddenly stood up, for the first time since the officers arrived. She walked toward us slowly. Her makeup was smeared slightly now, the perfect composure gone. She stopped in front of Emily. You did this. Emily didn't look away. I told the truth. Margaret's voice sharpened. You destroyed your father. Emily answered quietly. No, he did that himself. Margaret looked at me next. And you. You've always enjoyed proving him wrong. I shook my head. No, I just refused to disappear. Margaret opened her mouth to respond, but the ballroom doors opened again. The investigators returned, and my father walked in behind them. His face looked exhausted, but calmer. The lead investigator addressed the room. Ladies and gentlemen, Richard Hartwell will not be detained tonight. A ripple of surprise moved through the guests. The investigator continued. However, Hartwell financial accounts will be frozen pending investigation. The words landed hard. My father looked around the ballroom, at the investors, at the friends who now avoided his eyes, then finally, at me. For the first time all night, He looked like a man asking a silent question. Not for forgiveness, not for approval, just understanding. And I realized something in that moment. The public collapse had already happened, but the real reckoning for my father was still coming. Because the one person who could completely change the story of that Utah investment was lying in a hospital bed 20 minutes away. Victor Langford. And if he survived the night, he might tell everyone exactly what happened. The ballroom had quieted again. Not completely, but the chaos had settled into smaller conversations. Low voices, careful glances, people standing in tight circles, speaking the way investors do when millions of dollars might have just disappeared. The investigators had left. My father remained near the entrance, alone. For the first time in my life, Richard Hartwell didn't look like the most important person in the room. He looked like a man waiting to see how much damage the truth would cause. Emily stood beside me, arms folded tightly. "Do you think Victor will talk?" Daniel answered first. "If he survives the night, yes." "Why?" "Because he's the only one who can explain the Utah deal." Emily exhaled slowly. "And if he doesn't?" Daniel didn't answer, because we all understood what that meant. My father would carry the entire blame. Across the ballroom, Margaret had retreated to a table near the bar. Two of her friends sat beside her, whispering. But even they kept glancing toward my father. Wealthy social circles have a strange gravity. When power shifts, people instinctively move away from the person falling. Commander Gallagher joined us again. "I've seen this before." Emily looked up. "Seen what?" "Reputation collapse." He nodded toward the ballroom. "People are polite, but nobody here will trust your father with their money again." I knew he was right. Trust in finance is fragile. Once broken, it almost never returns. Emily watched our father across the room. He looks older. 16 years ago, he looked invincible. Tonight, he looked tired. Daniel spoke quietly. "You should talk to him again." Emily blinked. "Me?" "Yes. This isn't just Lily's story. It's yours, too." Emily hesitated, then nodded. "Okay." She walked across the ballroom slowly, toward the man who had controlled her life for decades. I stayed where I was, watching. Because sometimes the most important conversations happen when you step back. Emily stopped 2 feet from him. "Dad." My father looked up. For a moment, the room around them disappeared. They were just father and daughter. He spoke first. "You look like your mother tonight." Emily swallowed. That wasn't the response she expected. "Dad, I didn't mean for it to go this far." He nodded slowly. "I know. You meant to tell the truth." "Yes, and you did." He rubbed his forehead. "Maybe that's what I needed." Emily looked confused. "What do you mean?" "For years, I believed control meant protecting this family." He glanced around the room. "Tonight I learned something different." Emily asked quietly. "What?" "Control can destroy a family just as easily." The words surprised her. My father continued. "When Lily left, I convinced myself she betrayed us. But the truth is simpler." He looked toward me across the ballroom. I pushed her away. Emily followed his gaze. "Lily never stopped being your daughter." He nodded once. "I know that now." Emily hesitated before asking the next question. "What happens if the investigation proves you moved the money illegally?" My father didn't flinch. "Then I face the consequences." Her voice dropped. "That could mean prison." "Yes." The honesty in that answer made Emily's eyes fill. "Dad." He interrupted gently. "But prison isn't the worst outcome tonight." She frowned. "What is?" "Losing both of my daughters, forever." Across the room, I felt that sentence land. Emily took a breath. "That depends on what happens next." My father nodded. "Fair." Then she said something he clearly didn't expect. "Victor told Lily something before the ambulance left." My father's eyes sharpened. "What?" He said the Utah project was his idea, that he convinced you. My father stared at her. Did he say that? Yes. My father exhaled slowly. Then he laughed once. Not with humor, more like relief. Because that's the truth. Emily blinked. Wait, you tried to stop it? Yes. Victor promised the project was guaranteed. He paused. I was trying to recover losses from the previous quarter, but he pushed the investment forward. Emily frowned. Why didn't you tell the investigators that? My father looked tired. Because legally, it doesn't matter. I moved the money. The responsibility is mine. Emily shook her head. But if Victor organized it, he interrupted softly. Then he'll say so, if he lives. The room seemed to tighten around that sentence. Across the ballroom, Daniel joined me. Your father looks like he's accepted the outcome. Maybe, but I wasn't completely sure, because people rarely change overnight, even after their world collapses. Emily stepped closer to him again. David, if Victor confirms your version, would you tell everyone the truth about Lily? He didn't hesitate. Yes. Emily held his gaze. Completely. No excuses, no pride, no silence. My father nodded. Completely. Across the ballroom, several guests began gathering their coats. The reception was ending. The celebration had transformed into something else entirely. Emily returned to us, her expression thoughtful. What did he say? Daniel asked. She answered quietly. He's ready to face whatever happens. I nodded. Sometimes that's the hardest part. The doors opened again. Not investigators this time. A young paramedic stepped inside. Excuse me. Everyone looked up. He scanned the room until he found me. Dr. Hartwell? I stepped forward. Yes. He smiled slightly. Victor Langford asked me to deliver a message. My stomach tightened. What message? The paramedic pulled out his phone. He recorded a statement from the hospital. Victor insisted we bring it here. The ballroom fell silent again. Because whatever Victor had said could change everything. The paramedic pressed play. Victor's weak voice filled the room through the speaker. My name is Victor Langford, and the Utah project was my idea. Victor Langford's voice echoed through the ballroom, weak, breathless, but unmistakably clear. My name is Victor Langford, and the Utah project was my idea. Every conversation in the room stopped. The recording continued. I convinced Richard Hartwell to move the funds. I told him the development was secured, guaranteed. There was a pause. You could hear hospital equipment beeping faintly in the background. If anyone is responsible for the losses, it's me, not him. The recording ended. Silence. Not the tense silence from earlier, something heavier. Because the story everyone had spent the last hour believing had just changed again. Emily looked slowly toward our father. My father didn't react immediately. He stood still, processing. 16 years of pride had trained him to control his face in public. But tonight, that control kept slipping. Around the ballroom, people began whispering again. So it wasn't fraud? Then why move the money? He was trying to recover losses. Someone else spoke louder. Victor admitted it. Harold Kent stepped forward again. $4.2 million invested with Hartwell Financial. He looked at the paramedic. Is Victor stable? The medic nodded. Doctors say he'll recover. Relief passed through several people in the room, because now there would be answers. And answers meant lawsuits might change direction. But none of that was the moment that mattered most. That moment came when my father turned toward the room. He looked older, but steadier than he had an hour earlier. Ladies and gentlemen, his voice carried again, not with authority, but with honesty. You just heard Victor Langford's statement. He paused. The Utah investment was his proposal, but I made the decision to move the funds, without formal approval. He didn't hide from it. That was my mistake. A few investors exchanged glances, because accountability, real accountability, is rare in financial scandals. My father continued. Every account will be repaid. Every dollar. Even if it takes the rest of my life. Someone near the back asked bluntly, "How? Hartwell Financial is finished." My father nodded. "Yes, the firm will close." He looked around the ballroom slowly. "But I still own 3 properties, 2 commercial buildings, and the family home in Westminster." A ripple of surprise moved through the guests, because those assets alone were worth millions. He finished calmly. "All of it will be liquidated, to repay investors." The room grew quiet again. Harold Kent spoke carefully. "If Victor confirms his statement to the investigators, this might be negligence, not fraud." My father nodded. "That's what the lawyers will decide. But either way, I'm responsible." He stepped back slightly. Then he did something nobody expected. He looked toward me, Lillian. 180 people followed his gaze. My father's voice softened. 16 years ago, I told everyone my daughter failed." He paused. "Tonight, you watched her save a man's life in the middle of a ballroom." Several guests nodded quietly. My father continued. "She also saved my other daughter's life 7 years ago and paid part of her mother's hospital bills when I refused." He didn't hide it. He said it plainly. For a moment, the room seemed to breathe again. Then my father finished with the one sentence nobody expected. "My daughter didn't fail. I did." No one spoke, because sometimes the truth doesn't need applause. It just needs air. Emily walked toward him slowly. "Dad." He looked at her. "I'm sorry." She studied his face carefully. Not the businessman. Not the man who ruled every room. Just a father who had finally run out of excuses. Then Emily hugged him, right there in front of everyone. The kind of hug that ends a long war. Across the ballroom, Daniel exhaled quietly. "That took 16 years." I nodded. "Sometimes it takes longer." A few guests began clapping, not loud, not dramatic, but respectful. Commander Gallagher stepped forward. "Richard Hartwell." My father looked up. "You made mistakes tonight," Gallagher said calmly. "But you also owned them. That's rarer than you think." My father nodded once. "Thank you." Across the room, Catherine Whitaker joined me again. She crossed her arms. "You realize something." "What?" "Tonight, you saved 2 lives, Victor's, and maybe your father's reputation." I shook my head slightly. "That part isn't up to me." Catherine smiled. "Maybe not, but the room sees you differently now." I looked around. The guests who once avoided me earlier in the evening were now speaking quietly with Emily and Daniel. Several investors were already discussing legal options, calmly instead of angrily. The temperature of the room had shifted. Not perfect, but calmer. My father walked toward me slowly. 16 years of distance reduced to 10 feet, then 5, then 2. "Lillian." I waited. "I won't ask you to forget what happened." "Good, because forgetting isn't the same as healing." He nodded. "But if you're willing, I'd like to try again. Not as the man I was, as the man I should have been." I studied his face. People love dramatic reconciliation scenes, tears, music, instant forgiveness. Real life doesn't work that way. So I answered honestly. "We can start with something simple." "What's that?" "Honesty." He nodded slowly. "I think I can manage that now." Emily slipped her arm through mine. "Good, because I'm not letting either of you disappear again." Daniel laughed quietly. "Best wedding speech ever." Emily smiled through tired eyes. Worst reception, though. We all laughed, the tension finally breaking. Outside the window, snow had started falling again. Soft, quiet, the kind of snowfall that makes the world feel reset. Later that night, I stepped outside onto the terrace alone. The mountains were silent, the air cold and clean. I thought about the last 16 years. McMedical school, residency, night shifts. 239 lives saved now. Victor had become number 239. But the strangest part of the night wasn't the CPR, or the investigation, or even my father's confession. It was this simple realization. For 16 years, I believed my family ended the night my suitcase sat on that porch. Tonight, I learned something different. Families don't end. They fracture. And sometimes, if the truth finally gets spoken, they begin again. Emily stepped onto the terrace beside me. You're smiling. Am I? Yeah. What are you thinking about? I looked out at the snow. Table 18. She laughed. You mean the worst seat in the room? I shook my head. Sometimes the person at the worst table turns out to be the strongest one in the room. Emily bumped my shoulder gently. You always were. We stood there quietly for a moment, then she asked something softer. Lily. Yeah? Are you staying in Colorado longer? I thought about the hospital, the new position, the life waiting for me in Denver. Yeah, I think I am. She smiled. Good, because I missed having a big sister. The snow continued falling around us. Quiet, clean, a new beginning. And if you've ever been the person at the forgotten table, the one everyone underestimated, tell me in the comments, because those stories are the ones worth hearing. And if you want more stories about quiet strength, family truth, and the kind of justice that arrives slowly, subscribe. There's another story coming next week. One about a woman who walked into her ex-husband's corporate gala with a secret nobody in that room saw coming.